I'm Doug Doherty, president of Hamilton Flourishing, and we're glad you joined us today. We're continuing our travels through the candidates that are running for the all-important city mayor and city council of Chattanooga. And we're delighted today to have in our studio Monty Bruell. And Monty's a native of Chattanooga, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about that. A Harvard grad, an entrepreneur, community help kind of guy, and so I think you'll enjoy it. Monty, thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Well, Doug, thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity.
We're glad, and I will tell the audience that while we're talking to you, that your contact information will be rotating through this all the time. So if you're listening to Monty, you want to get in touch with him, you want to volunteer, you want to help in any way, both an email and a phone number are up there, the campaign phone number, and so you'll be able to copy that down. Monty, tell us a little about yourself. Where were you born? Are you married? Have children, grandchildren? Where did you go to school? What do you do for a living? If you can share, where do you go to church if you feel like it? And how do you like to spend your free time?
Okay. Well, as you've mentioned, I'm a native Chattanoogan. I was raised in Alton Park and East Chattanooga. I like to say I'm the one of the few candidates in this race who knows Chattanooga from both sides of the tracks. I am Baylor School's first African American graduate, and from Baylor I went to Harvard, and I have a degree in economics. After college, I worked for Jack Lupton and worked in the Coca-Cola bottling business, and learned so much about marketing, about business, about customer service. All things that I use to this very day. I have a combination of work experience. I've worked for big corporations like Coca-Cola, Marriott, Unum back in the day when it was Provident, Morgan Stanley. But for the last 10 years or so, I've been involved in Chattanooga's startup community. I continue to this day to be a shareholder and board member of a company called Rapid RMS that's doing very well. And I've been a mentor at the company lab, helping other startups to grow and to be successful. And in my spare time, I guess you can tell I'm not a thin man, so I enjoy going out and finding great restaurants, and I like to cook too. So I spend a lot of time in the kitchen cooking.
What's your primo dish? What do you when the best guests are coming? What do you put out?
Well, my fiance says that I make the best salmon that she's had, so that's got to be one of my top dishes. Yeah. So I am engaged to the wonderful Amanda Nelson Varnell. She has been the owner of Dish to Pass, which has been one of Chattanooga's largest catering companies. COVID-19 has kind of wiped out the catering business, so she's in the process of figuring out what her next act is going to be, but she's got several things on the table, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she's going to do there. I have a daughter who is an adult, who's also a Baylor grad, and my daughter is a fifth grade teacher in public schools here in Chattanooga. She teaches at East Lake Elementary.
Huh? Well, you got your fingers all over the place.
Well, I try.
Now you're running for mayor, so you're the whole city of Chattanooga, from I don't know how far north it goes, up Hickson Way, and then all the way to the border, and then
out to East Brainerd, and Lookout Valley.
It's big, so we want to make sure that with the council candidates, we have to ask them where they do. But you cover, if you live in the city of Chattanooga and you're of age, you need to register to vote by February the what is the voters registration?
I don't know the registration
February
cutoff.
1st.
There we go.
Register by February the 1st, and Early voting will begin on February the 10th. The election is on March 2nd. The early voting ends on February the 25th. So we're only we're less than 30 days away when we're recording this interview from when early voting starts. So, Monty, what has prepared you? You've really kind of covered everything. Anything you'd like to add for what prepared you for this work? Because you were on the city council.
No.
Or are on the,
no. This is my first run
Is it
for
really?
elected
For somebody,
office.
I don't know why I thought you were on the city council.
No. But that would have been great had I had that opportunity. But I'm excited to be a candidate for mayor. I've grown up in Chattanooga. As I said, I grew up in Alton Park. My grandfather played Santa Claus at the Bethlehem Center every year. I lived in City View Apartments up the hill from Memorial Hospital in East Chattanooga. I feel like I know those neighborhoods not because I've read a study, not because I hired a consultant to tell me what was going on in those neighborhoods. That's my life story. I like to say today, when I ride through Alton Park or East Chattanooga, I don't lock my doors. I roll down my windows so I can say hello to all the people that I know out there. That's the perspective that I will bring to the mayor's office. You may remember Chattanooga Venture, that did a lot of community goal setting and citizen empowerment work. I was chairman of the board of Chattanooga Venture in the 1990s and got to know a lot of people. One of the things of which I'm the proudest is that I helped to form a neighborhood association at what was then the Harriet Tubman housing development, public housing. It was the first time in Chattanooga that the residents of public housing had been treated like they were a real neighborhood, like that they had something to say about what went on in their neighborhood, and that was a great experience. I've also been the board chair of Glass House Collective in East Chattanooga, doing a lot of neighborhood revitalization work there, and that work continues, and Glass House Collective is just a great organization. So along with that, as I said, I am Baylor School's first African American graduate. So I got to meet people from Lookout Mountain and Riverview and other neighborhoods that I'd never been to before in my life, before being a student at Baylor, and I value those relationships. Some of my very best friends to this day are my classmates from Baylor. There's a group of about 6 of us, and I talk to them almost on a weekly basis.
And you're approaching your 50th alumni meeting, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe that's correct. I've got a ways to go.
You got a couple years.
We're not quite there
yet. As
you
get older, a couple years really doesn't mean a lot.
Now don't make me older than I really am here.
No, I'm not. I just had my 50th. And
okay.
It was this year. So tell me this. You've covered a lot of the questions I was going to ask you generally. What do you think, Monty, are the top 3 to 5 issues for you in this election?
Absolutely, without a doubt, the most important issue for me would be the huge income and wealth inequality that we have in Chattanooga. Believe it or not, in 1997, when John Kinsey was elected mayor, and I consider him the first of a long line of what I would call progressive mayors, the average African American family earned 62% of what the average white household earned in Chattanooga. Now, after all of this progress, you would think that we'd be able to improve that number. But pre-COVID, that number was 50%. The average African American household earned half of what the average white household earned. And I'm sure that now that we're in this pandemic, that number is even lower than 50%. So we've got to do something about addressing those inequalities. That's really the Achilles heel to this great economic engine that we have going in Chattanooga. I like to describe our city as being like a bright, shiny pickup truck. Some of us are riding up front in the cab, and we've got the air conditioning on, and we're playing the music, and we're looking out at the vista through the windshield, and we're not even paying attention to all of the poor people that are being piled into the bed of the truck, exposed to the elements without proper resources. The problem with that scenario is that eventually, as we add more and more low-income people to the bed of the truck, we're going to exceed the weight capacity of the truck. And it's not just those people in the bed who will be broken down by the side of the road, because that's not how trucks work. We're all going to be broken down by the side of the road together. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. That is the most important thing that we have to address. Now, related to that is, of course, education. A lot of our city's elected officials like to say, oh, we're not in the school business because, that's Hamilton County. Well, I've already met with Brian Johnson, our superintendent of schools, and I said, Dr. Johnson, I know that as city mayor, I'm not going to be your boss. I'm not going to get to tell you what to do. But I feel a moral obligation and responsibility to the children who live in the city of Chattanooga. So I'm going to be the best partner with you that I know how to be, and we're going to work to improve the schools that are inside the city limits of Chattanooga. So education is there for sure. And then we've got an infrastructure problem. We'd have to do something about our crumbling roads and bridges and our sewer system, you name it, and we need to address it. There needs to be some work there. So I think if I focus on just those three things, then I'm going to have a full plate. And we haven't even gotten to issues like affordable housing or public safety. Both our fire and police departments need some attention as well. So I think the next mayor of Chattanooga, which I hope is me, I hope the next mayor is going to have his hands full or her hands full with a lot of things that need to be addressed.
Good answers. What will be your priorities if elected? They might be, you might step in there and the first thing you may have to deal with is COVID, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so if you got any sense of, I know these are what you care about, but if you got any sense of what your priorities are going to be?
Well, I think one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to address our public transportation system.
Good for you.
I think that we can't be a world-class city unless we have world-class public transportation. So the two things I want to do, first of all, I want to make CARTA buses free to ride for all people all the time. Revenue from fares only covers 11% of CARTA's operating budget. It's not a very large number that we'd have to make up to make those buses free. And what most people don't know is that there's about $1 million in cost associated with the collection of fares. So when we get rid of collecting the fares, we save $1 million instantly. And that's very important too.
Now let me ask you just a clarifying question. When you talk about transportation, are you talking about a more robust system for the whole city so that people who live both in the inner city where they really need it because of the food issues and just they don't have as much transportation, but so that there's less of a footprint from cars and stuff from people coming in from the suburbs? And I mean, we just spent like $1 billion on all these roads. It's not quite $1 billion, but it's a huge amount of money on 27 up here. Right. And I've often thought, I said, man, if they just put that money in public transportation, they could have solved the same problem.
Well, that's the second part of the equation. Right now, the system doesn't really go where people need it to go, right, and it doesn't go on an often enough or frequent enough basis. So we're going to have to reroute the system, and we're going to have to improve the system. And I know that we can do that. CARTA already makes almost $1 million a year from operating the incline, and that's largely money that comes from tourists. I was in Norfolk, Virginia a year or so ago, and they have a water taxi system, a ferry system that goes between Norfolk and Portsmouth, and it costs $4 to ride. It's mostly tourists who ride it, although there are some locals who ride it too. But I'm thinking, with 20 miles of the Tennessee River flowing through Chattanooga, suppose we had a series of electric water taxis and ferries that stopped along the way between Moccasin Bend and the dam. I think if we charge people $4 a ride to ride our water taxis, that would be an incredible source of revenue. So, a lot of times people say, "Oh, Monty, you got all these ideas, but how are you going to pay for them?" Well, I guarantee you, Doug, I have thought about how to pay for all of these things. And everything that you'll hear me say, I have a plan for how to pay for it.
I have a plan. Well, that brings me to my next question. In all your thoughts and everything, what are your notions about a tax increase?
I don't see why we would have to have a tax increase. Our economy pre-COVID was growing pretty robustly, and the basic factors that were propelling that growth are still there. And I think that once we get enough people vaccinated, once we can put COVID in the rearview mirror, that we're going to return to a period of robust growth. I absolutely would not want to raise taxes.
Okay. What about the continued economic growth in the city and the need for more jobs? We talked about the income disparity. You're involved in the entrepreneurial world. Been a lot of good jobs here in the last 20 years from where we were when I was a boy. And do you have any thoughts about economic growth and creation of more jobs?
Sure. I've got three things that I think we should focus on. First, as you well know, small business is the engine that drives job creation in the United States. If you go to the Small Business Administration and you look at their data, the sweet spot for job creation in the U.S. is companies that are 4 to 5 years old and that have 15 to 20 employees. That's where the jobs are coming from. We spend a lot of time chasing big companies, and I'm happy we have Volkswagen, I'm happy we have Amazon, but we have a lot of small business owners who could use some resources too. Yeah. So I want to establish a small business resource center and provide everything from mentoring to access to capital to really drive those companies. And even though I've been involved in the startup area, startups don't create a lot of jobs. That's the sexy thing that people like to talk about, and everyone wants to be on the ground floor with the startups. But it's the solid small business that you don't hear about, that's not doing anything particularly sexy. That's where we've got to focus some resources. The next thing that I want to do is I want to recruit the 100 largest African American owned companies, the 100 largest Latinx owned companies, and the 100 largest women owned companies in America to come to Chattanooga. By traditional recruitment metrics, they're deemed to be too small. But all of these companies are very sizable companies. They range from on the low end, probably $100 million to well over $1 billion in value. And instead of putting those companies up at Enterprise South, 20 miles from the urban core, why don't we put those companies in Alton Park or East Chattanooga? Can you imagine what we would do to the trajectory of those neighborhoods if we put a $250 million African American owned company right in the middle of East Chattanooga or Alton Park? These are the kinds of ideas, Doug, that we need to talk about.
Where have you been for so long?
Hey, but I'm here now. And I guarantee you that we're going to do things differently under the Bruell administration. And I told you I had three things. So the third thing is I want to pursue creating what I call a clean money economy in Chattanooga. That means that I want to balance economic development, environmental sustainability, as well as social justice. We want to create jobs, but we want to create good jobs that are good for the people, that are good for workers, that are good for employers, and good for our environment. There's no reason that we can't do those things. You may or may not know this, but by 2050, there's about $50 trillion of wealth that's going to transfer in the United States from baby boomers like us to millennials and Gen Xers. Right. And those Gen Xers, the people who are going to inherit that money, they don't want their money invested the same way that we might have invested our money. So I think there's a huge opportunity, and Chattanooga should stand up and be a leader in this area. We don't want to be behind the curve on this. We want to be out in front leading the parade.
Great answers. Let me change up just a little bit. What is the proper role of government in the life of families? And the reason I ask that is because a lot of times when we think about the city, we run into problems like in the area of education, where because they'll say the success of a child has very much to do with the network that surrounds it. So we have people that say, well, the government needs to be more involved in family in that way. And there's other ways that too, but do you have a notion or a thought about the proper role of government in the life of families?
Sure. I think first and foremost, a government is there to provide for the public safety of the community. Everyone wants to live in a safe neighborhood. I think that government is there to provide infrastructure. We all want good roads to travel on. I believe too that government should be there to provide opportunity and equality. Opportunity is different from giving someone a handout, right? We don't necessarily, we're not in the business of giving people fish. We want to be in the business of teaching people how to fish so that they can provide for themselves. And I think government has a role to play in that for sure. And then the final thing I will say about government is that there are certain risks that would be unimaginable for an individual or a business to take. But I think that government should be in the business of mitigating risk so that private enterprise can thrive, that we can create kind of a risk protection system. One of the great things that we have here in Chattanooga is that EPB, our major electric and internet provider, is municipally owned. So we can do things in Chattanooga that a lot of other cities just can't do. I think that it's time that we took our feet off the brake, if you will, and put it more on the accelerator. I think that there's an opportunity there for us.
Good. Let me ask you this question, another bit of a change-up. Do you see a role for the faith community in local government programs? I'm talking about churches, synagogues, mosques, temples. Is there a role for them to play in your administration?
Absolutely. When I made the decision to run for mayor, one of the first places I went was the faith community. I have met with all kinds of churches, from big churches in East Brainerd to little churches in the inner city, black churches, white churches, and I've got a group of probably about a dozen pastors that I count on, that I go to counsel me and to give me advice. Having said that, what I have heard from them is that we don't have a lack of resources in the faith community here. What we have is a lack of coordination, cooperation. There are some congregations that really just want to write checks, like, okay, we've got the money, we'll fund whatever program you want. And then there are, smaller inner city churches that don't have the money, but they have boots on the ground. They are there fighting the good fight every day and trying to improve the community. And then there are some churches that just don't know what to do. They haven't yet come into the game. So as mayor, I want to form what I call a faith action committee. I know that the current administration has a faith council, but I'm not sure that they are about action. I want to create a body in the faith community where we are talking about what can we do, and that we can say, okay, we will act as a clearinghouse. We will connect people who may not already know each other. I find that there's a tremendous amount of goodwill in the faith community, but it just hasn't been properly tapped. And sometimes government is hesitant to reach out to the faith community, but I'm going to embrace the faith community as mayor because I think that there's a lot of goodwill there and there's an opportunity to do a lot of good things.
Great answer. Tough question, but it needs to be asked if everybody's running. Are you pro-life or are you pro-choice? And if you can add, you can elaborate as much as you want.
Sure. I think everyone is pro-life. There's some branding that has gotten here, and I know that that pro-life has come to mean anti-abortion. I don't think that any mayor is really going to be faced with any issue that deals with whether a mayor is pro-life or pro-choice. What I can say about that is I will respect the rule of law, I respect the Supreme Court, I respect the legislature, and I as mayor will uphold the law. Now, I'm not going to run away from the question. In my personal belief, I am a believer in a woman's right to choose. So that's who I am personally. But as mayor, I don't get to do everything that Monty wants to do. I will do what the law and the courts indicate that I should do.
Well, the reason that's important is there have been some outlier. We have a conservative state legislature, and there have been in other states there have been outlying communities that have said we're not going to enforce whatever law. And it's not just with this. It's been, this happened with immigration. This happened with any number of things. There's cities where you're safe in there if you go there. Anyway, so that's important. How do you respond? This came up a lot with a couple of years ago with a group called Unify Ed. It came up recently with Black Lives Matter being operative in the Chattanooga area. The whole notion, and you may have more insight on this than anybody I've ever talked to, on systemic white racism. I mean, is that how should a voter feel about that, and what would you do to address the citizens of Chattanooga about that?
Well, I don't think there's any question that we have systemic racism here. It's baked into the system. And when we talk about systemic racism, we're not talking about individual people being racist. It's not about Monty saying, "Oh, Doug, you're responsible for, all of the bad things that have happened to African Americans." That's not what we mean. We just mean that the institutions have been set up to provide a bias against African Americans and a bias in favor of white Americans. And if anyone doesn't believe that our society isn't set up that way, I think they haven't taken a really close enough look at it. So the question becomes, what do we do about that? Currently, if you look at our public schools, for example, 36% of Hamilton County public school students read at grade level. And
on a good year.
Well, that could be on a good year, and I think black, brown, and low-income people are disproportionately, affected by that.
With this COVID thing, it's gotten worse.
Yes, absolutely. So we've got to do things to provide more opportunity. If you look at the number of mortgages that are given, not just in Chattanooga, but virtually anywhere in the United States, you will see that banks and financial institutions reject minority applicants at a far higher rate than non-minority applicants. That's problematic because for most families, the number one creator of wealth for the family is equity in the family home. And so if you really want to address disparities, economic disparities between African American, Latinx, and white families, we've got to increase the rate of home ownership. So when we talk about systemic racism, we're talking about answering questions like those. It's not about identifying racist. It's about weeding the biases out of the systems that we have.
And it sounds like your answer previously about recruiting the 100 top businesses really gets to that as well. Let me ask you this. This COVID thing has just really put a bump in the road for a lot of people, multiple bumps. Do you believe the previous city administration and the current county and state administrations has handled the response to COVID-19 well, or could it be improved upon? And if so, how? How would you? I mean, it's been a big mess.
Yeah.
I mean,
so first of all, if you look at Europe, and you look at Australia, you look at places around the world that have done a great job of managing this pandemic. These are places that enacted a federal response, a national response. It should never have been left up to governors. It should never have been left up to county mayors or city mayors to plan the response. Now, because the current administration in Washington failed us by not properly enacting a COVID plan, I think governors and some local officials haven't made all of the best decisions. Here in Tennessee, we never received a mask mandate from the governor, and I think that's a mistake. Now, having told you everything that's wrong here, what could we have done better? The number one thing that we could have done better is we could have tested more people faster, and then after that, we should have done more contact tracing. My fiance's oldest son lives in Sydney, Australia, and everyone in Australia was required to download an app on their phone that told officials who they were around. So when someone was diagnosed, you could automatically, by using the app on the phone, see who had been exposed. And so they were able to contain outbreaks. If we had done a better job of contact tracing, we would not have had to shut the whole economy down. We would have just been able to target isolated pockets. And the majority of people who were put out of work would not have been put out of work if we had just done a better job of contact tracing.
I'm going to kind of rush ahead because we're running out of time.
I'm a little long-winded on my answers.
No, you're doing great. How will you approach the problems of shootings in Chattanooga? I'm talking about weekly, weekend-wise, just random shootings into houses, drive-bys, and it scares people.
Mm-hmm.
The news media doesn't cover it very well, even though we're one of the most violent cities in America. What do you? How do you respond to all that?
Well, I think the majority of the shootings are drug and gang related. We're known in Chattanooga as a great city for logistics, moving goods from one place to the other. Well, that's true for legal goods, but it's also true for illegal goods. And so we have a lot of warring factions fighting over turf, fighting over drug routes and that kind of thing. So the number one thing that we have to do is we have to address our gang problem here. And I think that the way we do that is by using a carrot and stick approach. Just like if you're a doctor or if you're a lawyer, that doesn't define who you are as a person. That's what you do for a living. And we should look at gang members the same way. They weren't born gang members. People chose that because they thought it was the best way to make money. They felt pressured by people in the neighborhood to do that. So we've got to find a way to give people a path out of that world to something that pays a livable wage, where they can be upstanding members of society. Now, having offered the carrot, we need to have a big stick, because if you are an adult and you decide, well, no, I just want to be a criminal, I want to be a lawbreaker, well, there's no more carrot for you. We've got to weed you out. We've got to let people know that there are harsh consequences for willfully choosing that kind of lifestyle. So I think that if we could address the gang problem, if we could address the drug problem, then the shootings would take care of themselves. I think your average Chattanoogan isn't at risk of getting shot. I think that if you are living in a middle class neighborhood in East Brainerd or Hickson, you're probably not at a huge risk of gun violence.
Okay. Last question. What will you advocate as far as affordable housing within the city?
My degree is in economics. So when I look at issues of affordability, the most efficient way to make any good or service more affordable is to increase the amount of money that consumers have to spend on it. So if we increase wages, if we bring more jobs to Chattanooga that pay livable wages, then housing will become more affordable. Right. Now, having said that, I recognize that we don't have enough affordable housing stock. The average cost of a home being built in Chattanooga now is about $350,000. And the threshold for affordability, or the ceiling for affordability, is around $200,000. So that's quite a difference we have to make up. The city owns a lot of vacant land, a lot of vacant buildings. I think we're going to have to create urban land trust, and the city is going to have to put some of its property into the land trust to make housing more affordable for people. I don't know, why the city's content to just own all of these non-performing assets when they could be being put to good use. So I think that's the role that city government has to play. And I've talked to the leadership at CNE, Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise. They've just released an affordable housing plan, and I think that we ought to take a good look at it. It's a good plan, and as mayor, I would put CNE in charge of implementing that plan and provide the support and resources from the government that they need to do that.
Well, great. Well, Monty, thank you very much. That's all for Hamilton Flourishing. Any last words?
I would just like to thank you for the opportunity. I think that this next mayoral administration is going to be an opportunity to bring our city together, and we need to return power to people and to neighborhoods. So if you live in Alton Park or Normal Park, East Chattanooga or East Brainerd, you should have the right to define how you want your neighborhood to be. And as long as it's legal and ethical, I think you should have a government that would support you and stand behind you and help you be the best neighborhood that you can be.
Well, great. Well, Monty, thank you. And we've been circulating how to contact you on the screen. People can email you. People can email your campaign. People can call your campaign, call you. And so we encourage citizens, if you're encouraged by Monty in any way, want to help him, reach out and get in touch with him. Monty, thank you for being a part of this, and we wish you well, and we wish you well. And this is Doug Doherty for Hamilton Flourishing. Thank you.